cowboy saved two Apache girls. By morning, their mother came with a mysterious gift. Winter night, Wyoming, 1881. The wind tore through the pines, sweeping snow in frantic gusts that stung the skin like needles. Jackson Cole, hunched in his saddle, heard it then. A sound too raw to belong to the wilderness. A cry, sharp and desperate, splitting the silence like glass breaking in the cold. He pulled on the reins, his horse stamping nervously against the drifts. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then he saw them, two small figures pressed against a slab of rock, half hidden in the shadow of the trees. Little girls, shaking, clutching each other, their eyes wide with terror. Just beyond them, a lynx prowled, its body low and muscles drawn tight, yellow eyes locked on its prey. The predator's paws moved soundless over the snow, every step calculated, inevitable. Jackson's hand went to his rifle. In that frozen instant, the wilderness narrowed to a single choice: intervene or ride on and let nature do what it always did: devour the weak. Jackson Cole had not always belonged to silence. Once, his world was filled with voices, laughter, and the creak of a porch where a woman hummed while a boy played at her feet. That was before the war, before the fever, before the long retreat into the wilderness where only animals dared live as he now did. He had marched under a tattered flag when he was young, believing words like duty and honor meant something. What he found was mud and blood, men torn open by grapeshot, and generals who fed their soldiers into the fire for pride. He buried friends by the dozen, then kept fighting because orders did not care about graves. By the time the war spat him back into civilian clothes, he had nothing left in him but scars that itched at night. Still, he had tried. He went west with Clara, his wife, and with Samuel, their boy, no more than 3 summers old. They bought a patch of ground near Cheyenne and built a cabin that smelled of pine pitch and hope. Clara planted flowers in coffee tins. Samuel's laugh rolled through the house like spring water. Jackson thought he had outrun the darkness. But sickness came, fever that spread like fire in the valley. Clara held Samuel in her arms one night, whispering lullabies as the child shivered against her breast. By morning both were gone, their breaths stolen by the same merciless plague. Jackson dug the graves himself, side by side beneath a cottonwood, and when the last clods of earth fell, he felt something inside him collapse beyond repair. He left the cabin standing and walked away. In the mountains, the days bled together. He trapped beaver and marten, sold their pelts when the need for powder and salt forced him into town, then vanished again before anyone could draw him into talk. The mountains were a stern teacher but a fair one. They did not lie. They demanded work, strength, and respect. He learned the patterns of elk across frozen ridges, the habits of wolves, the places where snow gathered deep and treacherous. His horse became his only companion, his rifle his only voice. People meant pain. He carried that truth like scripture. Every face he remembered carried the weight of loss. Comrades fallen in war, Clara's gentle eyes closing forever, Samuel's small hand turning cold. Better, he told himself, to keep away, to live as the world had shaped him, a solitary figure between rivers and peaks, leaving no mark that time could not erase. The seasons passed, each one carving him thinner, sterner. His beard turned gray before its time. He spoke to no one save for the brief exchanges when trading pelts at a post. Even then his words were spare, as if each one was a coin too precious to spend. Children in town stared at him like a ghost. Men kept their distance, sensing the wound he carried like an open knife. He liked it that way. Distance was safety. Yet solitude had a weight of its own. When the fire crackled in his cabin, when the stew simmered on the coals, Jackson sometimes found himself listening. For the sound of a second spoon against the pot, for Samuel's voice asking questions that never came. The silence pressed on him until he wished for storms, because storms made noise enough to drown memory. He told himself he was done with humanity, that he owed nothing more, had given enough to war and graveyards. But the truth, though he would not admit it even to himself, was that a part of him still yearned for something he could neither name nor allow. It lay buried like the cottonwood graves, covered over with stone and time, yet not wholly gone. He carried tokens. A scrap of Samuel's blanket, folded tight in oilcloth at the bottom of his pack. A locket with Clara's faded portrait, the glass cracked from years of rough handling. Some nights he would take it out, stare at the image until the fire blurred through tears he could not stop, then shove it back as though ashamed. The mountains forgave him those moments. No man lived so long without ghosts. By 1881, Jackson was known to few. A trapper, a loner, the one who lived high in the medicine bough where winter came hardest. He had no friends, no kin, and wanted none. He believed that was the only way a man could survive without losing what little was left of his heart. So when that cry rang out in the snow, when he saw the two small forms pressed against stone and the predator stalking them, he almost cursed his own eyes. He had not asked for this. He had no place in the fates of others. He was done with people, especially children, whose memories already tore him raw. And yet, even before his hand reached for the rifle, he knew. He knew because his heart, buried beneath years of ice, still had enough warmth left to recognize a simple truth. If he turned away, he would be no better than the lynx waiting to strike. The war had taught him to kill. The fever had taught him grief. The mountains had taught him silence. But none of it had killed the last fragment of mercy in him. And that mercy, unwanted as it was, stirred awake when he saw the terror in two young faces. Faces that, for an instant, blurred with Samuel's, as though the years had folded in on themselves. He tightened his grip on the reins. The snow hissed in the pines. His breath steamed in the cold. Jackson Cole had sworn he was finished with people. But the wilderness was about to test that vow in a way he could not escape. The lynx's body twitched once, then stilled, its yellow eyes glazing as snowflakes gathered on its fur. Jackson Cole lowered his rifle, breath steaming in the frigid night. His horse pawed nervously at the snow, sensing danger not yet gone. Only then did Jackson turn fully toward the sound that had drawn him. The two small figures pressed against a boulder, as if the stone itself might shield them. They were children, girls no older than 8 or 9, bundled in thin deerskin garments that did little against the bitter Wyoming cold. Their black hair was crusted with frost, their lips cracked, their trembling bodies pressed so tightly together that they seemed carved from one shape of fear. Jackson took a step closer, careful to keep the rifle pointed down. The elder of the two lifted her chin. Though her knees shook, her eyes burned with defiance. She drew the smaller child closer to her chest, ready to take the claws herself if the lynx had struck before Jackson's bullet. "You're safe now," Jackson said, his voice rough and unused. The words felt strange in his mouth, like tools long rusted. The older girl's eyes flicked from him to the lynx's still form, then back. She did not thank him. She did not plead. She simply watched with suspicion too old for her young face. The little one whimpered once, almost like a kitten. The elder hushed her softly in Apache. Jackson knew no more than scraps of the language, yet the cadence of comfort needed no translation. The elder shifted, her thin shoulders squaring. "We are not safe," she said haltingly in English. The words were careful, shaped as though learned recently. "They will come." Jackson frowned. "Who?" Her lips pressed tight. She would not say, but her gaze, darting into the trees, scanning the dark, spoke plainly. Whoever had driven them into the storm was more dangerous than any predator of fur or claw. Jackson's instincts urged him to turn away. These were not his troubles. For years he had avoided people precisely because people carried grief, betrayal, and the sort of danger that ate a man alive from the inside. The wilderness was cruel, but it was honest. It took only what it needed to survive. Men took more. Yet his eyes drifted to the younger child, whose thin body shivered so violently she could scarcely stand. Her head lolled against her sister's chest, too weak even to cry. Jackson's heart twisted with an ache he had not felt in years. He remembered another small body in his arms. His son Samuel, burning with fever, breath rattling away into silence. He had buried Samuel beside Clara beneath the cottonwood tree, and when he left that grave behind he thought he had buried every last shred of his humanity with it. But here it was, clawing back through the years of snow and silence. "What's your name?" he asked. The elder hesitated. At last she said, "Layla." Her arm tightened around the smaller child. "Naya. Layla. Naya." He spoke the names slowly, as though testing their weight. He looked at the snow, at the endless dark, at the thinness of their clothing. If he rode away now, they would not live an hour. And though every instinct screamed that to help them was to invite ruin, he knew he could not leave two children to die in the cold. He extended his hand. "Come." For the first time, Layla's resolve faltered. She stared at his outstretched glove, suspicion warring with desperation. Then Naya stirred, her small hand sliding free. Without a word, she placed it into Jackson's. Her skin was icy cold, fragile as a bird's wing. The crack inside him widened. He lifted the child easily and placed her upon his horse. Layla scrambled after her, keeping her arm locked tight around her sister. Jackson mounted, took the reins, and turned the animal toward his cabin. Snow lashed against his face, the forest whispering around them. When at last the cabin appeared through the storm, its roof sagging under snow, Jackson felt a strange unease. For years that place had been nothing but four walls and a hearth, a shelter for one man and his ghosts. Tonight it would be more. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and pine pitch. Jackson laid wood on the coals until the flames caught. He pulled down his single serviceable blanket and wrapped it around the girls. Then he set a pot above the fire, poured in the remnants of dried venison and root vegetables, and waited until the stew gave off steam. Naya stirred first, eyes half-lidded, lips parting as the scent reached her. Jackson placed a wooden bowl in her hands. She drank slowly at first, then greedily, broth running down her chin. Layla ate more cautiously, her gaze never leaving Jackson. She reminded him of a wolf pup, wary, ready to bite if cornered. When the bowls were empty, Jackson sat back. His voice came low, almost hesitant. "How far?" Layla's eyes narrowed, as though deciding how much to trust him. 3 nights, she said. "From the river valley. Soldiers came, burned our camp." Her hand tightened on Naya's shoulder. "We ran." The fire popped. Jackson felt the weight of her words sink into him. He had heard rumors in town. Settlements cleared, families scattered, but he had never sought the truth. He had told himself such things were not his concern. Yet here it was, shivering before his hearth. Layla's voice dropped. "You should not help us. If they find us here." Her gaze flicked to the rifle against the wall. "They will kill you also." Jackson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The flames lit the lines of his face, scars carved by war and grief. "I've already been killed once," he murmured. His mind went back to the cottonwood graves, to the silence that had followed. He had walked like a ghost ever since. Perhaps tonight was not about his survival at all. For a while there was only the crackle of fire and the soft rhythm of Naya's breathing as she drifted into sleep. Layla sat rigid, keeping watch as if the cabin itself might betray her. Jackson studied her. She was a child in years, yet her gaze carried the weight of generations. Then came the sound that shattered the fragile stillness. Hoofbeats, faint but growing, the steady rhythm of more than one rider, cutting through the storm. Jackson rose, the old instinct snapping awake. He crossed to the door and pressed his ear to the wood. Horses, moving slow, deliberate, hunting. Layla's face went pale. She whispered something in Apache, clutching Naya tightly. Then, in English, "It is them." Jackson lifted his rifle. For years he had sworn never again to raise it for anything but hunting. Yet tonight the barrel was steady in his hands. Behind him he heard 2 fragile breaths, one anxious, one sleeping. For the first time in years, his cabin was filled not with ghosts but with life. And outside, death was drawing near. The hoofbeats pressed closer, not hurried but steady, like a drum that marked the approach of something inevitable. Jackson Cole stood by the door of his cabin, rifle across his arms. For years he had kept the weapon for hunting elk, deer, the occasional wolf that wandered too near his traps. Now, for the first time in a long time, the barrel felt aimed toward men again. The fire crackled at his back, throwing warmth over two fragile figures huddled in a corner. Layla's whisper rose out of the dark. "They will come inside. They will not stop." Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. She held Naya so tightly the younger girl seemed swallowed inside the blanket. Jackson checked the chamber, sliding a cartridge home with a click. "Not if I stand in their way." The door shuddered under a hard knock. "Open, by order of the fort." Jackson pulled the latch and stepped out himself. The storm hit him sharp and cold, flakes stinging his cheeks. In the clearing stood two horsemen, coats dark blue beneath the falling snow, rifles slung, sabers at their sides. Their horses stamped the ground, breath puffing white. The elder rider leaned forward. "We're tracking runaways. Two Apache girls. They were seen heading this way. You'll hand them over." His words carried not request but command. Jackson planted his boots firm in the snow. "Ain't no one here but me." The man's eyes narrowed. "Then you won't mind if we take a look." He nudged his horse forward. Jackson raised his rifle. The motion was slow, deliberate. "You put one foot near that door, and you won't take another." The younger soldier's hand went to his pistol. The elder barked, "Hold!" His gaze locked on Jackson, measuring the resolve behind the rifle's dark mouth. "You're interfering with the army, mister. That's treason." Jackson's jaw clenched. "I've seen treason. Looked a lot like burning children out of their camps." Silence stretched. Wind screamed in the pines. Horses shifted restlessly. Behind the walls Jackson could almost hear the girl's breath. Layla's hope, or fear, hung on the line between men's pride and one man's defiance. At last the soldier spat into the snow. "You've chosen your side. More will come, and when they do, you'll regret it." Jackson's rifle never wavered. "Then you best ride fast and tell them." The men wheeled their mounts. Snow churned under hooves. The storm swallowed them whole. Only when the hoofbeats were gone did Jackson lower his rifle. He turned back inside. Layla's eyes met him in the firelight. She whispered one word, "Why?" He leaned the rifle against the wall, the weight leaving his arms but not his heart. "Because no one else would." She did not thank him. She only stared, as though searching him for truth. Jackson dropped into his chair. The flames danced before him. Two children breathed in his cabin, fragile and alive. He knew soldiers would return. More men, more guns, more certainty. But tonight, the choice was already made. For the first time in years, his silence had broken. And for the first time in years, Jackson Cole no longer feared the cost. The cabin door shut behind him, muting the wind's howl. Jackson leaned against the wood for a moment, his body heavy, the rifle still warm in his hands. The firelight painted the room in soft gold, shadows dancing across the log walls. He looked at the two figures huddled in the corner, Layla's eyes sharp with defiance, Naya's small body curled against her sister in exhausted sleep. "They will come back," Layla said quietly. "Not just two. Many." Jackson hung the rifle back on its pegs. His shoulders sagged as though the years pressed down all at once. "I reckon they will." The words left a hollow silence between them. Jackson sat near the hearth, feeding the fire another stick of pine. Sparks flared and rose up the chimney. He watched them climb, then vanish into nothing. Layla shifted, drawing the blanket tighter. "You did not have to do it. You could have let them look. You could have sent us away." Jackson shook his head slowly. "Wouldn't have sat right. World's got too many graves already because men turned their eyes aside." For a long moment neither spoke. The storm raged outside, clawing at the cabin walls. But within there was only the quiet of breath and flame. At last Layla asked, "Why are you alone?" The question struck deeper than a bullet. Jackson stared into the fire. "Buried my wife and boy. Couldn't stand what was left of the world after." His voice dropped low. "So I left it behind." Layla's gaze softened, though her chin stayed high. "And now, Jackson's answer came after a long silence. Now the world's found me again. Naya stirred in her sleep, mumbling something in Apache. Layla bent to smooth her hair, whispering back in her own tongue until the child settled. Jackson watched, something stirring in his chest he had long thought gone. The night dragged on. Jackson dozed in his chair, rifle across his knees. Each creak of the cabin or whistle of wind made him tense, certain the soldiers had returned. But no hoofbeats came, only the endless storm. At dawn, pale light crept across the floor. The girls were still asleep, Layla's arm draped protectively over Naya. Jackson rose stiffly, stretched, and stepped to the door. He cracked it open. The world outside was white and silent, snow deep, the soldiers' tracks already buried by the storm. He breathed in the cold, then closed the door again. For the first time in years, Jackson Cole felt something stir that was not grief or bitterness. It was fragile, uncertain, but alive. And he knew, clear as the light on the snow, that when the soldiers returned, because they would, he would stand again. Because the world had given him something back he thought was gone forever. And he would not let it be taken. Dawn came gray and sharp, the storm spent but its silence lingering like a warning. Jackson Cole stood at the threshold of his cabin, rifle slung across his shoulder, staring into the woods where the soldiers had vanished hours before. The snow had swallowed their tracks, smoothing over every mark of their passage. But Jackson's gut told him the truth. They had not given up. They had only gone for reinforcements. Behind him the fire popped. Layla crouched over the embers, coaxing them back to life, her dark eyes fixed on the flames as if they could tell her what was to come. Naya pressed close against her, still drowsy, clutching a strip of bread in her small hands. Jackson listened to their quiet words in Apache, sounds he barely understood, but which filled the cabin with a strange rhythm of life. It struck him that he had not woken to human voices in years. But peace could not last. By mid-morning the sound he had dreaded returned. The drum of hooves, many this time, rolling across the frozen valley. Jackson's spine stiffened. He set the bread knife down, reached for his rifle and stepped outside. Snow fell lightly, drifting like ash through the gray light. 6 riders broke from the trees, their blue coats stark against the white world. Their horses stamped and snorted, plumes of steam curling in the cold air. The same officer from the night before led them, his mustache stiff with frost, his gaze burning with recognition. He reined in just short of the cabin. "Cole, you're harboring fugitives. Hand them over now or we'll drag them out." His voice cracked across the clearing with practiced authority. Jackson planted his boots in the snow. The rifle rested against his shoulder, steady. "You'll not touch them," the officer sneered. "You think one man can stand against the army?" Jackson's eyes narrowed. "One man's enough to say no." The riders shifted uneasily. Some looked at one another, uncertain. The officer spat into the snow. "Search the cabin." 2 soldiers dismounted, crunching toward the steps. Jackson raised his rifle and sighted down the barrel. The clearing went still, the only sound the restless snorts of the horses. "First man who crosses that threshold," Jackson said, his voice low, "won't live to cross it twice." The soldiers froze. For a moment no one moved. Snowflakes drifted down, melting on the barrels of rifles. The standoff balanced on a hair's edge. Inside the cabin Layla clutched Naya tight. Through the thin wall Jackson heard the younger girl's muffled sob. His heart hammered, but his finger did not waver on the trigger. The officer's jaw clenched. He had not expected this old trapper to stand so firm. "You're making a grave mistake," he growled. "Defying lawful order. You'll hang for this." Jackson's reply came cold. "Maybe, but not today." The officer's hand twitched, almost giving the signal. The 2 soldiers on foot waited, breath fogging, nerves taut. Jackson drew in a slow breath, ready to fire. Then, from the pines, a flicker of movement. A figure stepped from the shadows, bow in hand, tall and lean. Her eyes blazed with fire as she drew the string back. Arrow pointed straight at the officer's heart. The soldiers turned, startled. The clearing seemed to tighten around them all. Jackson felt the world pause, as though the mountains themselves waited to see what would happen. The officer stared at Aya, then back at Jackson. Fury twisted his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The moment stretched, fragile as glass, ready to shatter. Aya's bowstring creaked under the strain. Her arrow locked on the officer's chest. Her face was cut with wind and hunger, but her eyes burned with a fierce clarity that froze the riders where they sat. Jackson's rifle did not waver. His finger curled against the trigger. For a heartbeat, the clearing was silent except for the groan of horses and the hiss of falling snow. The officer's jaw worked, rage and pride warring with fear. "You'll hang for this," he said at last. But his voice had lost its iron edge. Jackson fired into the air. The crack split the morning like a lightning strike. The horses reared, the soldiers cursed, and Aya's arrow held fast, aim true. Jackson's voice thundered through the smoke. "Next one won't miss." The younger soldiers shifted nervously. One muttered, "Sir, this ain't worth it." Their eyes darted from the arrow to the rifle, to the hard lines of the mountain man and the defiant woman who stood beside him. The officer's face twisted. He spat into the snow, a dark stain on white. "Fall back," he snapped. Reluctantly, the others obeyed. They turned their mounts, retreating step by step, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting the shot to come. At last they wheeled into the trees, hoofbeats fading until only the wind remained. Jackson lowered his rifle. Aya eased her bow but did not unstring it. For a long moment they stood in the snow, strangers bound by necessity. Then a cry broke the stillness. Naya's voice, high and trembling. She burst from the cabin door, blanket trailing behind her, snow up to her knees. "Mama!" Aya dropped her bow and swept the child into her arms. Layla followed close, wrapping herself around them both. Aya held her daughters as though the world could vanish if she let go. Jackson watched from a step away, the rifle heavy in his hands. He felt like an intruder in a sacred moment, yet it was his choice that had made it possible. For years he had told himself nothing mattered beyond survival. Now, in the snow before his cabin, life had proven him wrong. That night the cabin was warmer than he had ever known. The fire burned steady, casting a glow over faces weary but alive. Naya slept curled against her mother. Layla dozed with her head on Aya's shoulder. Jackson sat at the table, the obsidian knife before him, turning it slowly in his hand. It was more than a gift. It was a bond, a vow unspoken. He studied the amulet tied to its hilt. The firelight flickered on its black stone surface, reflecting his scarred face. He had made his choice, and the cost would come soon enough. Soldiers would return, not with 6 men but 20, maybe more. They would call him traitor, outlaw, enemy of the army. But as he looked at the sleeping children, at Aya's quiet strength, Jackson felt no regret. For the first time in many winters, his cabin was not empty. For the first time, he belonged. And he would not surrender that, no matter what came down from the valley. Jackson Cole had not slept. The night stretched long, filled with the restless pop of pine logs in the fire and the hollow groan of winter pressing against the cabin walls. Aya and her daughters slept in the corner, their breaths weaving into the hush of the room. But Jackson sat rigid in his chair, rifle laid across his knees, his eyes fixed on shadows. Every creak of the timbers, every sigh of the wind, carried the weight of approaching danger. He knew the soldiers would return. The army did not forgive defiance. They had left to fetch more men, more rifles, more certainty. And when they came, they would not leave without blood. Dawn rose gray over the mountains, its light sickly and thin, spreading like smoke through the pines. Jackson stepped outside, boots crunching in the frozen crust. The clearing lay still beneath a quilt of new snow, yet his chest was tight, his breath sharp. Then he heard it, low, steady, unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Not 2 this time, nor 6, but many, rolling together like distant thunder. He turned back into the cabin. "They're coming," he said. Aya stirred at once. her eyes opening with the calm sharpness of someone long accustomed to danger. She reached for her bow, her fingers brushing the worn string. Layla rose beside her, clutching Naya's hand. The younger child's eyes widened, but she did not cry. She pressed herself close to her sister, waiting. Jackson loaded his rifle, sliding cartridges into the chamber until the weapon felt heavy. Ready. He drew in a long breath, steadying himself. For years he had hidden from the world, burying grief beneath solitude. But now the world had found him again, and he would not turn from it. The hoofbeats grew into a roar, shaking the earth beneath the snow. Jackson stepped outside as snow swirled around him in pale flurries. The clearing filled with riders, 20 soldiers, their blue coats darkened by frost, sabers at their sides, rifles bristling like a wall of steel. Their horses snorted and pawed the snow, breath steaming into the frozen air. At their front rode the officer, the same mustached man from before, his face carved with pride and rage. "Cole," he bellowed, "this is your last chance. Hand them over and walk away. Refuse, and you'll die a traitor." Jackson lifted his rifle, the butt pressed firm to his shoulder. His voice rang clear. "Then I'll die standing." Aya emerged to stand beside him, bow drawn, arrow notched. The two girls lingered in the doorway, Layla shielding Naya, their small faces pale against the firelight behind them. Snow spiraled around them all, as if the storm itself paused to witness. The officer raised his arm. "Form ranks." Soldiers dismounted, rifles leveled. Boots crunched in the snow as they spread into a line. The world shrank to the space between Jackson's trigger finger and the soldier's first step. His heart thundered, but his hands were steady. He fired into the sky. The crack ripped through the valley, startling the horses. Smoke curled from the barrel as his voice boomed after it. "No further!" The line wavered. Men glanced at each other, unease flickering in their eyes. Aya's arrow shot into the snow before their boots, quivering upright, a promise of what her next would do. Her voice carried like steel. "Step again, and you die here." The soldiers faltered. Breath smoked between them, rifles quivering. One young man lowered his weapon an inch. Another shifted his stance, doubt plain in his face. The officer snarled, "Obey your orders." But doubt spread like fire. Jackson saw it, the fracture in their resolve. He stepped forward, rifle steady, voice low but strong. "You know this ain't justice. You know it in your bones. These are children, not enemies. You fire today, and you'll live with it all your days." Silence fell, heavy and fragile. The soldiers shifted, torn between conscience and command. The officer's fury boiled over. He spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol. "Then I'll do it myself." Jackson's rifle barked. The shot struck the pistol clean from the officer's hand, sending it spinning into the snow. The man reared back, his horse screaming, his eyes wide with shock. Aya's bowstring pulled taut again, the arrow aimed at his heart. Her voice was quiet, implacable. "Go. Tell them the mountains will not bow." The soldiers hesitated. One by one, rifles sagged. The line broke. The officer raged, but his command was hollow. With a snarl, he jerked his reins and wheeled his horse toward the trees. "This isn't over, Cole. You'll hang for this." The riders withdrew, hooves pounding, retreating into the forest shadows until only silence remained. Snow fell gently, erasing their tracks, as though the mountain itself had swallowed them whole. Jackson lowered his rifle. Aya eased her bowstring. The girls rushed from the doorway, flinging themselves into their mother's arms. Aya knelt, gathering them close, her face pressed against their hair, her shoulders trembling though her eyes burned steady. Jackson watched from a step away, breath heavy, heart still pounding. He had stood against the army, and for the first time in years he did not feel hollow. He felt alive. That night the cabin glowed with firelight. Aya mended Jackson's torn shirt, humming low. The girls slept curled together on the buffalo hide. Jackson sat apart, turning the carved amulet in his hands. Its stone was dark, but in the firelight it gleamed with promise. For years he had lived in emptiness. Now the cabin breathed with life. Home was no longer walls of timber and stone. It was the people within them, fragile yet fierce, bound not by blood but by choice. And Jackson Cole swore that whatever storm came next, be it soldiers, law, or death itself, he would not let them be taken. The storm that had raged over the valley broke at last. For several days snow fell gently, laying a deep white cover across the world. Pines bowed beneath the weight, creeks froze into silence, and the mountains seemed to exhale after holding their breath too long. The sound of hooves no longer echoed through the timberline. No officer's bark carried over the ridges. The army had withdrawn, leaving only uncertainty in its wake. Jackson Cole knew they were not finished. The army never forgot. Yet for now the cabin stood untouched, and for the first time in years, peace lingered at his threshold. Life shaped itself into rhythm again. Aya kept the hearth alive, her hands deft as she mended worn shirts, stitched hides, and taught her daughters to plait cord. Layla carried water from the frozen stream, careful but steady, her chin lifted with determination too heavy for her young shoulders. Naya followed wherever she went, tumbling through the snow, laughing at nothing and everything, scattering light into every corner of the cabin. Jackson found himself unsettled by the brightness of their voices. For too long his days had been filled with silence broken only by the moan of wind or the crack of his rifle. Now sound lived inside his walls again. Footsteps, murmurs, humming, even quarrels between sisters. Every sound carried like a cure into the hollow spaces left by grief. Evenings brought their own kind of stillness. When twilight spread violet over the ridges, Jackson often stepped outside. The air was sharp and dry, the stars so clean they looked close enough to touch. Snow gleamed silver across the valley, broken only by the path of children's feet from stream to cabin. Smoke drifted from the chimney, curling into the vast sky. He stood with rifle slung across his shoulder, scanning the tree line for sabers or glints of steel. Habit kept him alert, but only the hush of snow and the cry of an owl answered him. I had joined him sometimes. She carried silence differently than he did, not as emptiness but as strength. The obsidian amulet she had given him caught what little light there was, gleaming against her throat. For a while they would stand side by side, their breath mingling in the cold air, their eyes cast toward the same horizon. One evening she said softly, "You could have turned us away. You could have saved yourself when the soldiers came." Jackson's voice was slow but firm. Too many graves are filled because men turned their eyes aside. I won't add to them. Aya studied him long, her dark gaze cutting through the dimness. He saw both gratitude and sorrow there, the gratitude for his choice and the sorrow of knowing the cost of it. He had thrown away safety, withdrawn from the shadow that had kept him hidden. The army would come again. He had bound his fate to hers. At last she nodded once, not in thanks but in recognition, as if a covenant had been sealed between them. Inside, warmth pushed back the winter. The girls curled on the buffalo hide, Naya's hand clutching her sister's sleeve, as though even in sleep she feared separation. Aya covered them with a wool blanket, brushing hair from their brows with fingers that trembled only slightly. She sat near the fire, needle in hand, mending quietly. The tune she hummed was low and steady, part lullaby, part prayer. The cabin filled with it, the sound winding into the rafters like smoke. Jackson sat at the rough-hewn table. In his palm lay the amulet, dark stone carved with lines that caught the firelight. He turned it again and again, tracing the grooves as though they were words carved into scripture. For years he had lived like a ghost, anchored to grief. The war had taken his comrades, sickness had taken his wife and son, and solitude had taken what was left. But now life had returned. Not the same life he had lost, but something new. Fragile, demanding, fierce. He was bound now, bound to Aya, who had walked through the storm with nothing but her daughters and still stood unbroken. Bound to Layla, who watched everything with sharp, measuring eyes. Bound to Naya, who laughed like the world could still be trusted. Bound to the truth that had entered his cabin with them. A man could choose to belong again. The army would not forget. Jackson knew this as surely as he knew the snow would fall again tomorrow. Yet his fear was no longer greater than his purpose. If soldiers returned, he would meet them. If storms battered the mountains, he would weather them. The cabin was no longer a refuge only for himself. It was the hearth of a family, fragile but real, and he would not let it be broken. That night he lingered by the fire long after Aya's humming faded and the girl's breaths deepened. The amulet rested in his hand, heavy, real, a stone that seemed to pulse with meaning. He studied it, and in its darkness saw the reflection of the flame, steady and unyielding. Home, he realized, was not timber or stone. Home was not the rifle leaning against the wall, nor the hides stretched across the floor. Home was the lives that breathed beside the fire, the children who slept without fear because someone kept watch, the woman who had trusted him enough to stay. Jackson had chosen, and when storms rose again, as they surely would, he would stand.